The paternity test was done 3 years ago, and it named my husband as the father. I found the paternity test results in a folder that discovered the paternity test results hidden in a folder behind old work totes in our garage. I didn't shake my hands. I read the date, then the name. Then came the words, biological father. Some part of me needed to see proof before I allowed myself to feel anything. Nathan was traveling in 3 states on a sales trip. I was alone in that garage when my marriage quietly divided into a before and an after. I married Nathan Cole 10 years ago in a small backyard ceremony behind his mother's house in Maple Ridge, Ohio. I was a paralegal in a city firm. He sold industrial equipment in 3 states, was gone Monday through Thursday most weeks, and was home just enough to keep the marriage steady instead of strained. He always smoothed over these things in private conversations. We were not the couple that others worried about. We were the kind of couple other couples said they wanted to be like. And for a long time, I believed that too. There was an extra plate at the table for every Thanksgiving, every 4th of July, and every birthday that mattered. It was Vanessa's. Diane, Nathan's mother, had introduced me to Vanessa years ago, describing her as someone who had grown up almost like Nathan's sister. They were so close that no one ever questioned why she was always invited, why her 2 children called my husband Uncle Nate, or why Diane fussed over all 3 of them as if they were family. Mia and Owen. Both are 6 years old. They had Nathan's exact laugh, the one that was too loud at his jokes. But I told myself plenty of kids picked up mannerisms from adults they spent time around. That year, I often reassured myself with various thoughts. Actually, I was excellent at it because I'd had some practice. The first real crack came out of our joint account. $600 was a recurring transfer that went out on the 15th of every month for more than I had bothered to check. The label simply said, support. When I asked Nathan about it at dinner, he didn't look up from his plate. Like that explained $600 a month for years running, he said. Vanessa's situation is challenging. That night, I let it go. I didn't allow it to affect my thoughts. Then I began to see things I had trained myself not to see. A birthday card from Mia, a glittery marker, and the proud handwriting of a 6-year-old, which I read to my dad before someone scribbled over the last word and wrote Uncle Nate above it in different ink. An old boarding pass in a jacket pocket that matched, almost too conveniently, a set of months from 9 years ago. Once I asked Diane, gently, what happened with Vanessa's ex, the way you would ask anyone's past, and she snapped at me so fast I actually stepped backwards from her kitchen counter. I want to be honest about something. I was vague and general in my suspicion, so I didn't look for that folder. But some part of me had known, half of it, for months. I looked because I needed to stop almost knowing and start actually knowing, one way or the other, even if I wasn't ready for the answer waiting on the other side of it. It was cold in the garage that afternoon, the kind of cold that creeps into your fingers before you know it. I was supposed to be looking for our old holiday decorations, the plastic bin with the broken lid that never quite closed right. Instead, there was a second bin behind it, one I didn't remember, pushed all the way back against the wall like it had been put there on purpose and left alone. Ever since inside was a folder, unmarked, a little warped from years of garage damp. I didn't even want to open it. Some still self-protective part of me almost slammed the lid back down and walked away, the way I'd done a dozen times before when faced with smaller doubts I'd talked myself out of. But I didn't. I sat right there on the concrete floor and opened it anyway. On top was the paternity test. Nathan's name, typed clean, as the biological father of both children, dated 3 years earlier, from a lab 2 counties away. There was something worse, in a way, underneath it. A folded piece of notepaper in handwriting I knew immediately because I'd read 100 of Diane's birthday cards over the years. It said, "He can never know she found the note. Keep it simple." I pondered that sentence longer than I did the test results, because while the test revealed what had happened, the note revealed who had been controlling the truth all along, and how long they had both expected me to remain exactly where I was, smiling, setting an extra plate, and never asking the one question that would dismantle everything they had constructed around me. I didn't cry in that garage, and that surprised me more than the folder did. Instead, I felt something colder, something more useful. I photographed each page, trying to achieve the right lighting, trying not to smudge or move anything out of place. I returned the folder to the same bin, against the same wall, with the lid at the same angle as when I first saw it. The weeks that followed made me someone I didn't quite recognize, and someone I was, frankly, better at being than I'd anticipated. Reading contracts and depositions for a living for 10 years had taught me how to build a file quietly and how to gather what you need without ever tipping your hand until you are ready to use it. I called the lab on the test under the guise of a records request and verified that it was a real, functioning clinic and not some made-up thing to end an argument quickly. I pulled up Nathan's old expense reports, still saved from years ago when I used to help him track mileage for taxes, and matched 3 specific trips to the exact window 9 years earlier when Vanessa would have been pregnant. I dug up 4 more of those $600 transfers, which went back further than I'd thought. All the way back to a year before the twins were even born. I didn't say anything to Nathan. I said nothing to Diane, not a word or a hint. Not even when she rang just to have a word or a hint about nothing in particular. I asked him at dinner how his week had been, as I always did. We got to his mother's house, and I helped set the table, and I set Vanessa's extra plate myself, like I always had. My hands steady in a way that honestly freaked me out a little once I noticed it. What I kept circling back to. Late at night, while Nathan slept beside me, oblivious to the fact that his entire preordained version of our life had split open, was that note in Diane's handwriting. Not the affair, if that was the correct term for whatever this relationship had been. Not even the children, and God knows that alone would have broken plenty of marriages. It was the line, "Keep it simple." Like a problem to manage. My entire decade of marriage felt like a story written by someone else, and I was expected to sit quietly and read the version they handed to me. I considered confronting Nathan on the first night, with just the two of us in our kitchen, so he could either apologize or lie to me without an audience, allowing me to avoid seeing someone else's face during the conversation. I didn't think it was worth it. In private conversations, he always smoothed over these things. I'd seen him do it with smaller lies for years, the same easy explanation in the same calm voice, until I doubted my memory instead of his story. I wasn't going to allow him a silent room to do that again, with something so significant. Diane had made up the cover story. I had assumed Diane had asked Vanessa to play her part at every single holiday for years running. Diane was the only one in this whole deal who really thought she was smarter than everybody else at that table, me included, and had been for a long time. If the truth was going to come out, it was going to come out somewhere Diane didn't control the room, somewhere she couldn't smooth it into something manageable with one calm sentence and a look that told everyone else to let it go. It was 5 weeks until Thanksgiving. Year after year, without fail, Diane hosted the same table, the same china, the same extra plate for Vanessa, and 2 more now for Mia and Owen, who are old enough this year to sit at the big table with the adults for the very first time. I had my file. I was growing it quietly, a file that Nathan had never once thought to look for, because he had no reason yet to suspect I could keep a secret from him. One weekend, I drove to my sister's place and told her I had something work-related that I needed to think through, and I sat at her kitchen table for 4 hours laying out everything I had: date transfers, the exam, the note. At Thanksgiving, she asked me, more than once, in front of everyone, if I was sure I wanted to do the exam and not somewhere quiet and private first. I told her the truth. I told Nathan and Diane that I had given them 10 years of private conversations so they could be honest with me, and that instead of telling me the truth, they'd used every one of those years to construct something more complex. 2 weeks before the holiday, out of the blue, Vanessa called me, and her voice was tight in a way I had never heard from her before. She said she was just checking in, seeing how things were going, and if I'd been by to see Diane lately. It wasn't what she said that told me that something had changed. It was the way she said it, as if she were picking out each word from a list someone else had given her in advance. I told him everything was okay. I told her I was looking forward to Thanksgiving as usual. I could hear her sigh on the other end of the line, relieved, and for one small, uncomfortable second, I almost felt sorry for her before I remembered how many holidays she sat across from me, knowing exactly what I did in, quote, A.T. Diane called 3 days before the dinner, which was unlike her. She never called without a reason. She asked me if I could come in early that day to help set up the table like I used to before things got busy at work. Of course I said yes, and I meant it, because showing up early guaranteed that I'd be in the dining room, folder in hand, long before anyone expected the evening to go anywhere but exactly where it always went. The night before Thanksgiving, I stuffed the folder into my bag, along with a change of clothes, the way I would for any normal family dinner. I saw Nathan zip the bag shut. He asked what was inside. I told him it was work I hadn't finished, and he believed me right away, like he'd believed a version of me for 10 years straight without ever checking. I was awake most of that night, not out of fear, but of something closer to readiness, an emotion I hadn't expected and didn't trust yet. I put the folder back where I had found it, closed the box, and for the first time in 10 years of marriage, started keeping my secrets. By 9 that morning, Diane's kitchen smelled like sage and butter, and I was already there, just like I promised, folding napkins into the same triangle shape she'd taught me a decade ago. She hummed to herself, working the turkey, a kind of satisfaction I hadn't seen in months, and for one strange second, I almost let myself enjoy it. The ease of a woman who had no idea her whole arrangement was about to end at her table. I set my bag down by the coat closet, the way I always did, and felt the weight of the folder inside it the whole time I moved around that kitchen. Diane asked me to get the lovely china out of the hutch, the set she used only twice a year, and I did, stacking the plates carefully while she talked about nothing in particular: the weather, a neighbour's new fence, and whether the yams needed more brown sugar than last year. I answered her as I always did, easily and warmly, while a folder 6 feet away in my bag would end her neatly ordered world. Nathan showed up just after noon, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and went straight for the den to watch football with his dad, the way he had every single Thanksgiving of our marriage. Vanessa arrived about 1, with Mia and Owen following in matching sweaters. Diane had clearly picked out for them, and for a moment, the entire scene resembled how it had always been. I put 2 more places at the big table myself, like I always did, and Diane gave my shoulder a squeeze on her way past like I was doing her a personal favor. That day I saw things in a new light, like you notice a room once you know where the exits are. Diane refilled Nathan's glass twice before dinner even began, the kind of small attentiveness she reserved only for him. When I asked her something perfectly ordinary about Owen's soccer season that fall, Vanessa winced, barely, like she'd braced herself for an entirely different question altogether. Mia asked if she could sit next to Uncle Nate, and Diane answered before anyone else could. "Of course you can, sweetheart," in a voice pitched a little too bright for the question. We had sat down at 4. Diane said grace, The same words she said every year, thankful for family, for health, and for the people gathered under her roof who made her life complete. They all said, Amen, and I said Amen too. Then I reached into the bag I had put by my chair and set the folder down on the tablecloth, right beside the mashed potatoes, close enough that Nathan's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. I didn't yell. I asked Nathan calmly if he wanted to tell me what was in it before I did it for him. He looked at the folder, then at me, then at his mother, in that order. And something in his face told me he already knew exactly what he was looking at before he'd opened it. Diane was the first to reach for it. She snapped it open fast, like you'd snatch your hand away from a hot stove. And for a moment, nobody at that table said a goddamn word. Then she saw the second page, the folded note in her handwriting, and I watched her face go pale in a way I will never forget as long as I live. The DNA test, wasn't it? The note contained her words, and in that moment, she realized that I hadn't found it yesterday. I had known for weeks and kept my mouth shut, waiting for this moment to come. Nathan began to talk quickly, as he often did when trying to explain himself in private, now that the table had gone silent. However, I had already used up all the time for private conversation to address something before it had a chance to develop. It's not what it looks like, he said. It was a long time ago, before things got serious between us. I was going to tell you eventually. Vanessa asked me not to say anything for the sake of the kids. Each sentence was the opposite of the one before. I let him keep on talking. I didn't have to cut him short. The room was already doing that work for itself. Vanessa did not defend him. She was silent for a moment. Then she put down her fork and said quietly that she was worn out. Not tired of the day. She'd had enough of years of holidays spent pretending, of coaching her children on which words were safe around which people, and of watching Diane manage a lie so carefully that everyone forgot it was still a lie. She said the twins deserved not to be hearing two different versions of their father, and she was done being the one who was asked to keep that story simple for the comfort of everyone else. And then Diane tried to say something. Something about the family, something about not wanting to hurt anyone needlessly, something about the timing never being right. I looked at her and asked one question, the one question I had come prepared to ask. I asked how long she knew. She did not answer immediately. And that silence, in a house full of people, answered for her more clearly than any sentence could have. I don't think Nathan's father had known any of this either. He very slowly put down his own fork and asked Diane, in a voice I'd never heard him use before, if any of what Nathan just said was true. Diane didn't look up at him. Instead, she looked at the folder, at her own handwriting on that piece of notepaper, as though she were trying to remember writing it and just couldn't quite manage it anymore. He asked her again, this time louder. And something in his patience finally ran out after 30-some years of marriage to a woman who apparently managed more than he'd ever known about. Diane's hands lay flat on the table, braced as though she were attempting to hold the entire evening still by sheer force. His name, spoken quietly and only once, was not an answer, but merely a sound, and that conveyed everything her silence had not already revealed. Why did everybody stop eating? Mia asked, in the way 6-year-olds ask things that grown-ups have been avoiding for years. Nobody answered her straight away. Owen just looked between the adults at the table. Something significant was happening beyond his understanding, as kids often do before they have the words to express what they are feeling, or before they have the words for what they are sensing. I told Mia quietly that the grown-ups had to discuss something important, and that we would explain it to her properly later when it was just us, and in a way that made sense to a kid her age. It was the first thing I'd said in several minutes that wasn't directed towards someone else's guilt, and it steadied me more than I expected it to. The rest of that dinner did not conclude in the same way as any previous Thanksgiving at that house. Nathan followed me into the kitchen, attempting to explain himself in private now that the table had gone silent, but I had already used all my remaining private conversation time on him. However, the version that everyone else heard was beyond his control. I told him I wasn't interested in the version he wanted to share with me privately. I left before dessert, the folder back in my bag, Vanessa's eyes following me to the door with something that looked almost like relief. Diane said nothing to me when I left. I don't think she had one prepared. For the first time in 10 years, I was the one who got to leave a room without having to explain myself to anyone in it, or 3 weeks later, Nathan was moved into an apartment across town. He attempted several times to dismiss the twins as an irrelevant chapter in our marriage, treating the paternity test and years of $600 transfers as mere technicalities rather than acknowledging a decade of decisions made without my input. Before Christmas, I filed for divorce. It wasn't a hard decision by then. The difficult part had already happened, silently, in a cold garage months ago. In the weeks that followed, Diane called me a few times. I ignored most of those calls. The one time I answered, she wanted to talk about the family, about not letting this tear everyone apart, about how none of it had been meant to hurt me personally. I told her evenly that I knew she hadn't meant to hurt me. I told her that didn't change the fact that she'd spent years helping someone else lie to me and calling it protecting the family. I haven't spoken to her since, and she hasn't made much effort either, which told me something about how much of that relationship had only ever existed for Nathan's sake in the first place. A few months later, Vanessa called once, not to apologize exactly, but to ask if I'd still be willing to see Mia and Owen sometimes, since I was the only steady adult they'd known who hadn't disappeared or unraveled after that dinner. I said yes, immediately. Whatever had gone on between the grown-ups in that story had never been the children's fault, and I wasn't going to make them pay twice for a lie they never asked anyone to tell on their behalf. That spring, I moved into a little apartment on the other side of Maple Ridge, close enough to my old life that I still knew the grocery store on the corner and the diner where Nathan and I used to get breakfast, but far enough away that it was mine and mine alone, a place nobody else had a key to and nobody had ever helped me choose. I remained in my job. Truthfully, after everything she went through with me at her kitchen table, I held on to my sister. Held her tighter than I had in years. I didn't keep Nathan, and some days that still surprises me more than the folder ever did. How quickly a decade can end once you finally choose to stop protecting it. There is a crayon drawing taped to my refrigerator, in Mia's careful 6-year-old handwriting, addressed simply to Elena, no other name attached to it, no correction scribbled over the top of it this time, nothing hidden beneath a different word in different ink. She drew our kitchen, the one in my new apartment, with 3 stick figures in it. Her brother, and me, no mistaking us. All of us smiling the same crooked, uneven smile kids always draw when they're trying to get it exactly right. At most mornings, I look at that drawing as the coffee brews, and I think about how long I sat on the floor of that garage, sure my whole life had just quietly ended. It wasn't done. It had only just begun telling the truth. I never yelled at that table, not a single time, and never had to. I just watched Diane's face when she realized I'd known for weeks and hadn't said a word until I was ready to say everything at once, in the one room where no one could smooth it over. Tell me honestly, what would you have done differently if you had discovered that folder in your own garage? Would you have met him that very night, alone, or waited as I did and let the truth fall where it would do the most good? And honestly, who would you have judged more in this story, Nathan, or the mother who spent years keeping his secret simple? Please let me know in the comments. If you, like me, are haunted by stories like this one, subscribe to The Long Memory. There's always another one waiting.